Please join me in welcoming Steve to the stage.
Thank you, Ashton. I am weirdly proud of that fact that I have 400 connected devices in my home, and I run my own Wi-Fi network, so I know where they are at all times. So I'm Steve Chazin, VP of Products for Alarm.com, and I want to speak to you today about why I think that AI is a rocket ship for the mind, an expression that'll probably make more sense by the end of this presentation. But first, I need to apologize. This was not the career that I had in mind for myself. I wanted to be an astronaut. I vividly remember tugging at my dad's pant leg, looking up at him and saying, "Dad, when I'm your age, I'm going to be walking on the moon." This was so amazing to me. I just couldn't believe that it existed and we could do this then. Well, my dad brought home this piece of space-age technology from the office about 4 years later. He worked at RCA's David Sarnoff Research Center. And this was the first scientific calculator normal humans could buy. It was called the HP35, named for the 35 buttons on the front. And this cost about $400 in 1970 something, which is about $2,800 today. And my dad did not want to get in trouble. So I remember him saying, "Hey, we could come in and we could try it." He put it in his bedside table, plugged it in the wall, and said we could come in one at a time with one hand behind our back, and we could use only one finger. My dad. So I was 7 or something at the time, and for whatever reason, my 7's times tables was hard. So I approached this thing, I enter 7 times 7, hit enter, and it thinks about it, and it gives me the answer, 49. I was like, what? How? And then I entered the largest equation my little mind knew then, which was 12 times 12, enter, and now it thought about it, it seemed to me a little bit longer, 144. How? And so then I guess I had an epiphany at 7, and I decided to try an equation I didn't know the answer to. 1, 2, 3 times 1, 2, 3, enter. This thing actually did take longer. I remember that. The answer, 15129. I don't know why I still memorized. But I remember looking up with my dad, I'm like, how can it do this? I was thinking it was doing what I was taught to do, which was essentially memorize numbers in a timetable, but it couldn't have memorized that equation. So I look up at my dad, he looks down at me, he had this moment, you probably had these with your children, where you get to teach your child something. My dad knew he had me, and he looks down at me, he goes, "Well, son, these are called integrated circuits." I'm like, "What's an integrated circuit?" He goes, "Well, they're tiny wires, they shrink down, put on the chip, they put the chip in the computer, and it does the math." So I thought about it for a second, I'm like, "Dad, so it's little wires?" He goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Dad, how can wires think?" And my dad didn't have the answer to that equation. And it blew me away that wires could do this, and that he didn't know the answer. And I made up my mind that this was going to be a career I was going to be in. And being an astronaut couldn't come fast enough because my dad told me it was because of computers like this that we were able to go to the moon. We couldn't do it without it. But when I was 12, I got a pair of these corrective lenses, and somebody told me that I can't be an astronaut. Because to be an astronaut, first you have to be a pilot. And to be a pilot, then you needed perfect vision. So my dreams of going to the moon died in that day. But my dad brought home another cool piece of technology from the office. RCA was early in microcomputers. They actually built this kit you could take home and wire it yourself with a soldering iron, which I did. And I taught myself about computers at a very young age. And my neighbor had a much more powerful computer, a TRS-80. And he would invite me over and talk about programming. And he told me one day that I could play against the computer a game of tic-tac-toe. How? It's a game people play. How can the computer learn to play a game? And what's more, he told me he wasn't programming it with the rules. Every time I played it, it learned how not to lose. That just resonated in my brain that somehow computers were figuring this stuff out, even then. Well, I knew I had to be in this industry. I was never an astronaut. This is my first business card at Apple because I worked for Raytheon building missiles, and they didn't have my business card ready, so they called me a rocket scientist, which is kind of cool. This is my first real card when I worked for Apple at the Harvard Business School. And later on in my career, I got to meet one of my heroes and work for Steve Jobs. And I got to ask him at an event, we were setting up for something quite like this. I said, "Why didn't you start a computer company in the first place?" He told me 2 things. First one, it kind of pissed them off that all of this new technology was locked away in air-conditioned rooms, lorded over what he called the white-coated priest of the computer room. And he was afraid that this technology, like others in the past, would only be for few people. He wanted to unlock it and give that power to everyone, the power to be your best. The second thing he told me was an article he read in the early 70s. It's hard to see this, but Scientific American did the math on how much energy it takes to move an object from point A to point B based on its weight. And it turns out, it's hard to see, but humans showed up right here. Not much more efficient than a sheep or a cow. But somebody took the occasion to put a human on a bicycle and measured that. And it turns out we were way more efficient. So Steve thought this is a great metaphor for early computers, because back then, what was a computer for? And so came up with this metaphor of a bicycle for the mind. In the same way gears and machines amplified humans' muscles, computers would amplify humans' minds. And we actually use that in the education channel, Wheels for the Mind, where we gave away our computers pretty much at cost so that young students could write the software for this new platform. And it worked. Now computers are everywhere, right? They're in our elementary schools, they're in our classrooms in college, they're obviously at work, they're embedded in almost everything we use, from our televisions to our cars, to our appliances, our cash registers, and of course, we all carry around a supercomputer in our pockets. And those are the ones that we think about as computers, but computers are working on your behalf all the time. You interface with dozens of them every day and you don't even think about it. To get here, to find your flight, to book your flight, and to find your gate, computer did that. They helped pilots fly for much of the flight here. They helped you find your luggage, they helped you get at your room, and you probably used a computer to pay for coffee this morning. Now I know what you're thinking, Steve. Computers are great. What about this AI stuff? Right? And more importantly, will AI take my job someday? Well, let's look at the facts. When I was young working on my computer, I actually had to program in what was called machine language. Essentially, I had to arrange the ones and zeros in just the right order for the computer to understand what I was telling it to do. In fact, you could see the ones and zeros on that screen. My neighbor, who was doing tic-tac-toe, same thing. Today, and I actually mean yesterday, I asked Perplexity.ai to write an unbeatable tic-tac-toe game, of which I don't know how to do, create the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript for me, which I have now pasted on my blog. And if you want to play this game, which was invented yesterday, you can go to skytech.io/about, scroll to the bottom of the page, it'll work on your phones, and you can try to beat the game. My son likes this because we used to do all kinds of stuff. He says, Dad, you should make it so you have a choice of human first or AI first. So I went back to Perplexity yesterday and asked it to add that code. Whoa. So now certain CEOs are worried that maybe we don't need coders. But there's also people that are worried about art. Art is a uniquely human thing. You have to feel it and express it. It comes from another space, from your heart, not from your brain maybe. And yet this piece of art won first place, the Colorado State Fair, and it was developed by Midjourney with a prompt. There were no rules for AI winning art contest. There are now. And then if you've been paying attention, this is OpenAI's new Sora video generator. It's not been released yet, but this prompt, and only this prompt, was what was provided to the machines to create this video. And now, in the industry, motion picture industry, there are people sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars of investments deciding, is this going to be good enough for what we need it for, than starting to produce movie studios. Who knows? But look, this is not new. The Luddites used to burn down textile mills in the 19th century because they were afraid that low-cost labor with machines would replace very skilled workers. And when I was young, math teachers picketed against calculators. You may remember that. Well, let's face it, AI is here. That genie is not going back in the bottle. And we should also recognize that we in this room benefit from it, right? The security panel, which all of you know, Hasn't changed that much since I installed this in my home in New Hampshire and wired it directly to my Hollis, New Hampshire Police Department, which I was allowed to do back then. Now, it's monitored by a human. In fact, if you think about it, when this started, a human brain was required every time just to find out that almost every time there was no threat to life or property. And they used to be wired to a terrestrial landline, and the only thing that operator knew was which door or which window or later motion sensor was tripped. That's it. Then some 24 years ago, Alarm.com comes along and puts a cell radio in that same security panel. And it does two things. Number one, it gives you a high fidelity signal which can't be cut by garden shears in your landline. But more importantly, now it's sending telemetry all the time about that property and its occupants. So now, thanks to this, we don't know, the system doesn't know if it's you going to get a breath of fresh air at 2 in the morning, or it's an evildoer trying to climb in and do you harm. But the system knows that's not normal for you and your house, and it sends you an alert, even if, especially if you never arm your panel, right? So that same panel, same sensors now paired with a different kind of AI can do other things that we couldn't do before. We can get a signal to tell us that something's happening. Maybe someone's trending towards a UTI simply because you've taken too many trips to the restroom based on your average. And recently we've taken that same kind of technology and paired it with the thing you're carrying in your pocket so that families have an understanding, a glanceable UI of how they're doing at a distance. And if the AI detects something doesn't seem right, pushes you a notification. Something as simple as this, knowing that your HVAC system is going to work in the middle of winter because the algorithms are constantly watching to see if your system is performing properly, something no human could do, provides that real value. Now, those are for homeowners or business owners. What about monitoring centers? They already benefit from this too. Before, they were all alone in their pursuit of figuring out if this was a real event. Now, they actually have the property owner telling them this is either a real verified alarm or not, and the property owner is actually getting those signals themselves from other AI agents. So the monitoring center can provide a much better answer. And now we have new AI-powered services like ambient insights for alarm response that uses sensors the agent never had access to figure out if this is a real event or not, giving them a likelihood to cancel or likelihood that a person's on site. Even things that are not from the fabric of security, like Wi-Fi lights and Wi-Fi smart plugs, can now provide a signal that something is happening in a property where there are no motion sensors. There may be a child hunkered down in a closet during a fire. Now we can find that out. All right, so let's move to the second product that we all know is benefited by AI, and that's the security camera. Now, much like the security panel, this thing was hardwired back to a room where humans use their eyes and their brains to determine in real time if there was something bad happening. They still have these in casinos, but most places have been abandoned, and a VCR took its place. And so after a break-in, the police or the property owner would go figure out what happened. And of course, I don't know about you, but every robbery movie I've ever seen, the bad guys know about this and they find the tape and they destroy it, and then there's no evidence. And in fact, we used to measure the value of these systems by how many hours of footage they could cram on a tape. And companies like Panasonic built these time-lapse VCRs so you can get much more content on a single tape. Now, the tape went the way of digital, and now we use hard drives. And then those hard drives became augmented by the cloud, where no bad guy, no robber, no perpetrator could even find the footage to delete it, right? And then when consumers got their first taste of security cameras that they could buy for their homes, they were valued the exact same way. How many days or weeks of footage do you want, Mr. Human, with your eyes to review, and how much do you want to pay for that? And in fact, this is DropCam. This is 12 years ago. Yesterday, took the screenshot. This is how many of these products are still sold. Nest Aware is the heir apparent of DropCam, and you still want to pay for how many days of footage you can review. Now, I remember when I joined Alarm.com 6 years ago, there was a conversation in our hallways of should we make our scrubber where you can scroll back and forth through video faster and easier to see back in time. Now, I'm glad we didn't do that, because now nobody wants to look at hours or days or, God forbid, weeks of footage. What we want now is AI to do that for us and tell us when it thinks something's important to us. Right? And we want to find out that something's happening we may never have awareness of. How would you even know if a package was delivered, let alone taken from your porch, without AI? And we've been able to take what was dumb cameras. These cameras were designed to do one thing, send an image somewhere else. And now the AI is looking at that image constantly, becoming a proactive security device to scare away a would-be perpetrator. Now, AI is still in the very early days of its ascension. How many of us would have thought, even 5 years ago, that we would trust our safety in a car driving down a highway at 85 miles an hour only through video cameras? I do. I'm an early adopter. But so about 6 months ago, I decided to kind of dig in on this and figure out what is really the state of the art of video AI. And so I gave myself a challenge. I wanted to produce a video, which I'll show you, but I didn't want to do any of the work. I'm kind of like that. So I asked ChatGPT to write the script and the shot list for me. I took a small clip of Sir Richard Attenborough, the guy who does the announcing for the Planet Earth series, who I just love. And then I used our video analytics platform at alarm.com to find footage of animals. I used AI for the sound effects and AI for the music. All I did was edit this. Everything else was done by AI. Would you like to see it? Yeah. All right.
While security cameras are primarily installed to protect people's homes, their ever-watchful eyes often reveal an unseen world. A wild rabbit making a life for itself in the grass unknowingly shares the space with another, a very hungry red fox. He's desperately searching for his next meal, and brave enough to be seen even in broad daylight in our backyards, and to cross streets and driveways to find it. Our yards are home to deer, who forage at night, searching for whatever vegetation is in season. Birds adorn our windows and seem to coexist with our friendly fox. And while all this animal life may go unnoticed to us mere humans, it inevitably stirs the attention of yet another animal, the domesticated descendant of the extinct Pleistocene wolves, also known now as a yellow Labrador retriever. And while our cameras might scare off would-be intruders, our pets have learned to respond to these same triggers, and even more astonishingly, have learned to leverage our sophisticated technology for their own benefit. In the ordinary moments, we find the extraordinary, where the whispers of nature's beauty and resilience capture our hearts. Until next time, may we find inspiration in the hidden wonders that share our world. All of the footage in this documentary was captured automatically by Alarm.com's video analytics platform from a single home in Fairfax, Virginia, North America.
That's pretty cool, but I guarantee you by the time I come next year, if they invite me back, I won't even have to edit that. All right, so where's all this going? Right? Where's it going, particularly in our industry? Well, now that people expect AI, right, to alert them only when it thinks something's important to us, freeing their brains for more human activities. And now that consumers are glad to pay for services that are possible only through the fusion of AI plus human, like proactive response or even drone guard services, what's next? What do you think is going to come? I believe that we should look at the medical industry. I think they already are on the early edges of this, because on one hand, they're worried about losing their jobs to AI, more probably than folks in this room. Because, let's face it, computers are probably better than a radiologist at looking at minute changes in an image on a screen. And in fact, the radiologist wouldn't have a job if not for computers. But they're also super excited about getting access to sensor data they never had before. You talk to any cardiologist who sees a heart patient in an emergency room, the first thing they check now is, do they have an Apple Watch? Because now they have information they never could have accessed before. And what's more is normal, perfectly healthy people and athletes are strapping on these devices, getting a glimpse of what's happening inside their body, something that's never before possible in human history. So now they can check their activity levels, they can check their blood pressure, their glucose levels, they can even score their sleep. There are also devices being developed by people in this room that look for respiration and heart rate changes and even falls without wearables. Now, the challenge in the healthcare industry is all this data exists, but it's locked on consumers' phones. Now, some of them can share through some of these tools with family, but they're having a hard time sharing with their doctors, even if their physicians have time to look at this. So we already have concierge medicine where you pay extra to see your physician. Will we have concierge health monitoring the same way we have concierge security monitoring? I think we will. And will we be able to, with all that data, will AI be able to figure out the patterns that might predict a heart attack or a stroke, the same way we can predict weather, none of which was possible when we were young. So we already know kind of history has painted a picture of where this goes. Consumers will pay for new technologies, especially those that provide real value or give them a backstop in the event of an emergency. This is our industry. I think just like security panels, through the power of AI, got connected and now provide awareness beyond core security, and cameras, which were once dumb, are now smart and proactive and provide a new channel to professionally monitor. I think we'll see AI become part of companions for seniors, watching over them in their homes, providing physicians and family with insights as to what's going on at a distance. And I think, and this earlier panel was talking about it, I think we'll finally see the rise of the truly intelligent home that won't require remotes or apps or trigger words or maybe even computer code. It'll just understand what we want it to do, a la Tony Stark. Whatever that future holds, I'm glad that I'm part of the group of people, especially those in this room, that are inventing it. I have one more thing. This is my dad. He got me involved in this. His job at RCA was a draftsman, and he used these mechanical tools to develop other mechanical tools in rooms like this, where people literally sweat over their work using paper and pencils and erasers. Near the end of his career, he started using the same analog tools to develop digital products. You can see some of this here. I remember him doing it. He used to have stickers he would put on the back of his hand, and then he would take them off with tweezers and lay them down on a piece of vellum and then run black paper tape through it, which would become the foundation for the design that they would print. And then they would shrink that down and print it again, and that became the foundation of the printed circuit, which was what was inside that calculator he brought home from his very workplace. But I remember when my dad was almost exactly the same age as I was, he got worried that the tools that he helped create were coming for his job, because a computer-aided design tool is much better at what he was doing than he was. It was faster, it was more efficient, and it was modern. And in fact, this tool, it's called Ashlar Vellum, was sold around the premise that it was design and drafting software that thinks. This was 30 years ago. And my dad was really depressed. I remember him. I remember what my mom was dealing with. And I remember how when he brought home that computer and gave it to me in a bag of parts, how that made me feel. And I looked at him, I said, Dad, like, what are you going to do? And his answer, very proud of my dad, was he learned this tool. He taught all the other draftspeople at RCA how to use it. And they actually were doing things they never had time to do. They didn't have to start from scratch every time. They didn't have to worry about making mistakes all the time. They embraced it. And my dad actually extended his career about 10 years by learning it. Well, now I get to return the favor, because I use AI every day to check on my dad, who lives alone in Florida. And one day in February, AI tapped me on the shoulder and it said, something doesn't look right with your dad. And when I checked in, he was on the floor. And so I used this tool to talk to him. Why, on another line, I called my brother in the front desk, and then I used another of our tools to see that he had gotten help. Information no one in our family would ever know without the tools that we collectively have built. So I'm thankful that AI is watching over my family, and this wires that think works the way it does. Now, Steve Jobs called computers a bicycle for the mind because it took humans to a place they could already go faster and more efficiently. I think AI is a rocket ship for the mind because it will take us to places we could never go alone. And I can't wait to see all the places we'll go. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today and for everything you do every day to keep families like mine safe. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to welcome our first keynote of Connections, Steve Chazin of Alarm.com, sharing more on Rocketship for the Mind. Steve has nearly 3 decades of experience designing, building, and selling innovative enterprise and consumer technology that has changed the world. As VP of Products, he defines next generation offerings for protecting people at home and work. He's currently developing health and wellness solutions for a post-COVID-19 world. A few fun facts. Steve has been a recurring guest on major news programs, appeared on the BBC television series Business Nightmares, and took part in the CNBC documentary Steve Jobs, $1 Billion Hippie. He's written and published 3 books and was hired by Steve Jobs in the 90s to help reboot Apple. So he was part of the team that returned Apple to profitability. And lastly, he has over 400 connected devices versus the average of 17 in the home that we've talked about during the conference so far. So please join me in welcoming Steve